So, hi everyone, this is Chinmay here from Exploring Sports. Today we have Miss Nanaki Chadha. She is a sports psychologist. She provides psychological support to athletes across broad spectrum of age groups and skill level, right from grassroots to national, international level of athletes. She for multiple sports. She is a chartered sports and performance psychologist under the British Psychological Support. Alongside, she is also a doctoral student and researcher in Staffordshire University. She has also been India's top among India's top 10 golfer during her time. So I'm sure you guys are going to enjoy this session and know more about sports psychology. I'm really excited. Hi Nanki, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine. And so how is lockdown treating you during these days?
Lockdown's been actually fine, I think. Of course, it is difficult when you're forced to stay indoors. And of course, now it's
Yeah.
been stretched quite a bit, but dealing with it. And I guess there's no other way, no other solution or option that we have. So, getting there. What about you?
Yeah, it has been quite good for me. I have focused a lot on myself, learned about myself a lot. So yeah, it was very interesting to know how I can be indoors and spending time with family. Learned a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's the best time that we've all got a lot of time to spend with our families, which hasn't happened before. At least this quality time. We've all been busy working or doing or studying in some manner or the other. So,
Yeah, like my family members all were like, it has been so many years you have been completely working, hardly spending and having lunch with us. So this was like a quality time which came with a long duration. So
absolutely.
yeah. So how was your journey like from athlete to a psychologist?
So my journey's been extremely interesting, at least for me, from being a golfer, being a competitive golfer, to sports psychology, I would say. And now that I look back, I can actually join the dots. So going back my journey, so I started playing golf at the age of 13, and that time I had no inclination towards psychology or studies for that matter. And At a very young age, I actually identified the psychological demands that a sport can have. Having played the sport, I am quite well aware, but also our viewers who have follow sports might be aware of the challenges that an athlete might face psychologically. So I would say I did experience all of that, immense anxiety and stress. And at that point, I was looking for a sports psychologist in India, a qualified sports psychologist, which was very difficult to find. And that's where I felt there's a void in the ecosystem. So that's when I went forward and did my master's in sports psychology. So I had a degree in psychology before that. So I combined my passion for sports and psychology and went to do a master's. Then I think I was over ambitious or was super passionate. So I went on to do a chartership and currently completing my doctorate degree in the same. So that's my story, professional story from a golfer to a psychologist. And like I said, it makes a lot of sense now. Now that looking back, I can actually join the dots. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's very interesting that very few of our viewer knows, like exploring sports viewer knows that you were among one of the top Indian lady golfer. So it's a pleasure to have a chat with you, and thank you so much for joining. Uh, uh, how much important it is to focus on mental health in sports?
That's a very valid question, and I would start with saying that sports is a highly competitive arena, and which promotes the notion that an athlete should either succeed or perish, and that mediocrity is unacceptable. And that's something sport really promotes, the notion, putting a lot of pressure on the athletes, being a breeding ground for negative thoughts, stress, and anxiety. uh, you know Also, I feel that athletes are always in the limelight. We marvel over their sporting abilities. We praise them when they perform exceptionally well, but at the same time we also really criticize them when they play poorly. uh, Also, within sports, there are a range of factors that an athlete faces. I would call them stressors, which is, of course, the performance is there. But in addition to that, it'll be keeping their form, being consistent, fear of injury in some cases. Post retirement is also another aspect, another stressor within sports. And
Yeah.
if we see currently, especially in India, we've had a few athletes who have actually come out and spoken about battling mental health. So I feel it really, really needs to be given importance, and I can't, I think, emphasize enough on that. And I think we need to really start creating the awareness within our athletes, for sure.
Yeah. So, according to you, how do you think athletes' mind differ from a normal person's mind?
Okay, that's an interesting question, and I personally feel every individual is unique, and they have their own issues that they are battling with, which they might not speak about. When we talk specifically about athletes, we need to remember that they are normal beings, human beings as well, in addition
Yeah.
to the sporting identity attached. But
Yeah.
because they have to deal with their sporting stressors as well, I would say athletes are more equipped and more efficient at coping with adversities as compared to a non-athlete, because sporting environment is not stable; it's constantly changing. So I feel they are more able to cope with the adversities and the changing scenarios. So I feel they are more resilient in term compared to a non-athlete.
Okay. Um, there are many situations where connecting to athlete is gets a little difficult. So, how do sports psychologists connect and build a relationship with elite athletes?
That's a really important question, and I'm sure a lot of athletes might have that question. But the key to a successful sports psychology, uh, to sports psychology, is the relationship, I would say. And that is connected, and that is actually developed first and foremost by addressing the confidentiality protocol with the athlete. By confidentiality protocol, I would say clarifying to the athlete that whatever information is being shared by them during the session will not be shared by anyone. So that
Yeah.
helps us as practitioners create a safe and a secure environment for the athletes. In
Yeah.
addition to that, to facilitate that process, and I'll say that building relationship is a process. It's not a one stop, in one session it'll happen. It is a process between the athlete and the practitioner, and that's also done by, from the practitioner's point of view, displaying empathetic understanding. So we try to put ourselves in the uh, shoes of the
Athlete.
athlete, by saying that, I won't say that we bring up personal experiences, but we try understanding what the athlete is really going through, listen to them, making them feel that they are heard, and also providing unconditional positive regard, basically not judging them and accepting them for the individual they are.
That's really important factor which you said, because in India most of the athletes come from a very different kind of background as compared to other foreign countries athletes. You have an experience of both sort of athletes. what difference did you see, and how differently did you try to help them?
Uh, could you just clarify in terms of difference in what context?
The way the athlete's mind is, from Indian athlete's perspective and a foreign athlete's perspective.
I would be very honest. I've had experience of working with athletes in India and, of course, when I was in the UK. And I feel there's not much difference in the mindset, the way the athlete thinks, because the stresses don't change. Whether
Yeah.
it's an Indian athlete or an international athlete, there might be cultural differences, there might be other issues in terms of the logistics. But in terms of the mental aspect, um, I feel it's quite consistent with the concerns that crop up among athletes.
Okay. So, athlete, as you said before, athletes have unique stresses with normal person's stress. So, after a while, few athletes get used to these stresses and they just neglect it. So, how do you think that is that a thing to worry about? Getting used to all
Uh,
the stresses?
I would correct you there in the sense I personally feel, yeah, athletes are faced with a lot of stressors, like I pointed out, but I don't personally feel that they get 100% comfortable with it. Even a seasoned player, there is some sense of stress or anxiety when entering a competition. Where the difference is that the way they handle or cope with the scenario. That's where I would say the difference comes in. But I don't think any athlete really gets comfortable and never feels anxious or even slightly stressed when entering a really important competition.
Okay. Um, does athlete's mind affects his performance in a any different level? Mind
Um,
state of mind?
I would say there are two ways of how it can affect the performance. So, of course, we've whatever I've spoken to you about till now, I have pointed out that sports can be psychologically really challenging. And I would say sports is a breeding ground for irrational thoughts. By talking about irrational thoughts, I mean these thoughts that are extremely rigid, they're dogmatic, there's no flexibility in this kind of thought process. For example, often you might hear athletes saying, "I must win this competition. I have to. I cannot fail. If I fail, it's the end of my career. I cannot tolerate it." So, in sports psychology, we call all these thought processes as irrational, which are said to impact them in a negative manner and hinder their performance. On the other hand, we need to help. If an athlete is thinking in a more rational manner, again, that's the
Yeah,
complete opposite of being irrational. So your thoughts are more
yeah,
flexible by saying, okay, I want to perform well, but if I don't, it's okay. It's not the end of my career.
yeah,
So the mind has a very powerful role to play where performance is concerned, and it can either it can have a facilitative impact on the athlete's performance or a debilitative impact on performance. So yeah, so it can go either way.
yeah. So, according to your experience, what are the most frequent concerns, psychological concerns the athlete faces?
So, according to my experience, I've been quite lucky to have a wide range of experience with athletes across different sports and different age groups as well. And I would say one common element and factor or a concern that rises is the fear of failure. So, no athlete wants to fail, they don't want to perform badly because they all associate fear of failure with a sense of shame that I'm not good enough an athlete or what will others say. So that's a common thing of fear of failure that if I fail, what will my coach think? What will my parents think? Am I really good enough?
Yeah,
So that is one major, I think, a common theme among all athletes, the fear of failure. They don't want to fail or even perform poorly in any competition, I would say.
yeah. We had a series where we had spoken to many athletes and interacting with so many athletes. We felt that they have lost that spark, like the way they were communicating with us for their mental stresses and the motivation in them due to lack of performance in various tournaments which were going to be held in 2020. So, what would you suggest to boost their energy or shine, get their performance shine back to all these tournaments?
So of course, especially in 2020, a lot of course, all athletes, their plans, have kind of been disrupted, and that is a major source of anxiety and stress among athletes, which of course further has an impact on their motivation levels because now um, there's of course sense of uncertainty that when will they have the next event. uh, so they don't have a set goal right now. They might say, okay, next year we have an event, but right now this year they don't have a set goal. Therefore it's very easy for any athlete to lose motivation. So the best way also, during this period, athletes are focusing a lot on the negatives. So it can be that they are
Yeah.
replaying the negative performances that they had previously or stressing about what's going to happen. So I feel during this period to maintain your drive and motivation, it's extremely important for athletes to focus on their strengths and replay their successful performances because that'll also enhance their confidence and it'll be a constant reminder that I have previously performed well, so I can once I have a tournament coming up. So I think just focusing, just shifting your mind and focusing on really the positive aspects that you've done previously would be beneficial uh, to enhance motivation among
Okay.
athletes currently.
Yeah, I feel this topic was very important for athletes because there are so many athletes in India who are concerned about all of this and going through a lot of mental stress. So thank you so much for that. And uh, what do you think when and why do athletes choke under pressure, and how can they be effective and perform under pressure as well?
Answering your first question, that why choking happens, choking is actually a very extreme symptom of anxiety. So choking is extreme, immense anxiety among athletes, and that often happens when the athlete is constantly focusing on the result of the competition rather than the task at hand. And it's actually an amalgamation of your stress, anxiety, worry. So there are a mixture of emotions that result in choking.
Yeah.
And one way that athletes can really overcome, so there are a range of strategies for athletes. However, sometimes it's very important to go back to basics and remind athletes of the basics. And by talking about basics, a strategy that I often use is controlling the controllables. uh, so athletes, you'll see many athletes constantly focus on things that are not directly in their control. For instance, it can be the result, it can be the weather, it can be the performance of the opponents, it can be the referee's decision, thus creating a lot of stress and anxiety. However, it's important for us to actually help them shift the focus to things that are in their control. For instance, coming up with a game plan, actually focusing on the process step by step of what the game plan really looks like. Because when they start focusing on things that are in their control, they get a sense of control, and then they have a goal in mind compared to focusing on the opponents. You can't really control the performance of the opponent, but you can really focus on your own performance, focus on the process step by step. So I think just going back to basics at that point is really, really important.
What are the difference which you have seen from an athlete who's playing from decades and an athlete who is just a rookie?
I would again say that for a season, for athletes, the stresses are the same, but I would say a more seasoned athlete, because of their experience, they are able to cope with the challenging situations, with adversities in a more efficient manner, and not let uh, it hinder their performance compared to somebody who's very new within the sport, within the competitive situation. So I would say that's the main difference.
Okay. And while handling an athlete in a team sport, what are the methods which you follow when you have to maintain a communication between the athlete uh, as well as the higher authorities?
Yeah, so it's always challenge. I would say it's always more challenging when working with athletes within an organization, because you are answerable to the other members of the team as well. But I would say when entering a team, when mostly within a team setting, the organization or the coach hires the sports psychologist. But I guess we need
Yeah.
to remember that our client is always the athlete, because we are helping the client, we are there for the client, for the athlete. So we need
Yeah.
to set boundaries at the very beginning. We need to communicate again the confidentiality protocol. By that, within a team, it'll be explaining to all the members of the team that we as practitioners cannot share any information with them without the consent of the athlete. And why I
Yeah.
said that this should be conveyed at the beginning of the session, or even before commencing the session with the athlete, because it can also result in conflict, because often the
Yeah.
organization would want the information because they've hired you. So it's very, very important to set boundaries and to convey the confidentiality protocol at the very beginning.
Yeah, that's really important because most of the time in team sports, athletes fear to talk to a psychologist because they feel that just because the organization have hired them, it will be a scariest thing for them to open up. So that's
Yeah, and
really important for athletes to know.
yeah, and they feel that if they speak to us, we will share all the information to the authority. So that's really not the case. Like I said, the athlete is our primary client, so nothing is shared um, without their consent.
So, what are the factors associated with the athlete's growth even after he or she is consulting a sports psychologist?
In terms of growth, would you say improvement? Uh,
Yeah, improvement of athlete.
so one challenge that our field, the field of sports psychology, faces is that it's intangible. And an analogy that I often use to explain this concept really is of an athlete's physical body. So
Yeah,
an athlete starts going to the gym, and after a few months, you see the difference, the transformation in the body. The athlete feels more, of course, you do see the transformation, but then internally also the athlete feels stronger, fitter, you know. I would
yeah,
say the mind is the same. It is a muscle which can be trained by psychological strategies. However, there's nothing
yeah,
visible to the eye. So that's a challenge.
yeah,
But how the growth and the progress, like you said, is monitored by different means. So the first would be by gaining subjective feedback from the athlete. So asking the athlete
yeah,
how they are feeling, having regular feedback sessions with the athlete, whether they are finding the sessions beneficial or not. In addition to that, administrating psychological tools. So these are questionnaires that athletes can be given to fill out. But I preferably avoid doing that because athletes hate filling out
yeah,
questionnaires. They don't
yeah,
like to filling on like it's giving like an exam. So I
yeah,
avoid that, but also keeping a track of their performance scores can be a source whether they are improving. And lastly, gaining feedback from the coach, the co-players, the parents.
Yeah.
So, and I would say one factor is not beneficial, but again, a combination of two or three factors actually gives you a bigger picture of how the athlete is progressing, where the psychological aspect is concerned.
Yeah. So, what would you suggest for athletes who have less support mentally, or they don't even know that sports psychologists exist to help in such situation?
So that is of course a challenge I feel, and I think we need to create more awareness. So we need more
Yeah.
people like you know, really creating awareness. Also, athletes need to understand that yes, the mind does play a major role in their game, and they personally want to improve in that aspect of the game. And I feel a lot of athletes think that going to a sports psychologist, they have an issue. So that's one thing that I would want to clarify, that coming to a sports psychologist does not mean you have an issue, you have a mental health issue. Sports psychologists can help support athletes and help them deal with the challenging situations, the adversities, and all the stresses that I spoke about at the beginning. Also, it's not that you need to have an issue like confidence or a concentration issue. It can be as simple that you just want to go to a sports psychologist and improve your game.
Yeah.
So I would say you don't really need to have a problem to go to a sports psychologist. It can just be a session to vent out the stressors, the emotions. That's about it.
Yeah, yeah, that was really important for athletes to know. While athletes, when it, what's important for athletes to look when they are finding a sports psychologist to work with?
That's a very, very important question, and I'm extremely glad that you brought it up. I would say, first and foremost, when looking for a sports psychologist, it's very important to look at their qualification. And by qualification, I would say a minimum master's degree from a recognized university. Because no offense to anyone, especially in India, since I've come back, there are a lot of practitioners who might call themselves sports psychologists, but at the end, when we are making that choice, we need to really look at the qualification. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, qualification is the most important factor.
Thank you so much for joining. It was really pleasure having a session with chat with you, and I'm sure that this conversation is surely gonna help some of the other athletes knowing about sports psychology.
Thanks. Thanks for having me on the session today.
Thanks a lot, guys, for staying for so long. I'm sure that this conversation has helped athletes or many of y'all to for any concerned about sports performance and psychology. Thank you.